What's up, guys? Welcome into Dog Central on a Sunday evening. I'm Graham Coffee. This is the Dog Central YouTube channel. You can find us on dogcentral.com for all the in-depth Georgia analysis and intel that you could possibly want. Busy show for you guys tonight. I am fresh back from SEC Media Days in Nashville. Also, fresh back from the front lines of a very, very large Twitter war with Vol Nation out there. So, shout out to any of you guys who maybe hate watching us this evening. We appreciate your views. Yeah, lots to get into. So, we're going to get into it. First and foremost, I want to talk about SEC Media Days from the Georgia perspective, right? So it's kind of an interesting build up to Kirby Smart coming into Nashville on Tuesday. I think a lot of people were curious to see, what kind of questions was he going to get? That was a lot of discussion sort of around the building at the Grand Hyatt and night before went out with some media folks, and kind of everyone was sort of speculating lots of offseason headlines that have maybe not been the friendliest for Georgia. And so how many questions was he going to get asked in his main stage appearance or just throughout the day? Kirby and Georgia, basically when the schools come to SEC Media Days, like, they kind of have the option to, everyone has to appear on the main stage, but they have the option to appear on whatever radio shows they do or don't want to go on. And the radio shows kind of set that up with Claude Felton, Georgia's sports information director. Georgia had a very busy day. Like, they did not duck seeing anybody. They went and talked and interviewed with lots of folks that they didn't necessarily have to. I was just very struck by the fact that Kirby Smart is really good at this, and I've made the argument in the past that Kirby Smart understands better than most how we consume college football today, how the modern the modern kind of media cycle works with this sport, and the way that Twitter works, and the way that recruiting momentum is, so fickle in terms of, hey, you might have a big run of prospects committing, and then all of a sudden, some guy flips out of your class to Ohio State or Alabama or Florida or wherever it might be, and everyone on the internet's like, oh, this program owns that program. And that's not how the real world works. That's not how college football actually works. But that is how a lot of people consume the sport right now. So it'd be silly to act like that's not what's happening. And I think just in life in general, when I was writing my notes from SEC Media Days, I one thing that I wrote down looking back was that Kirby Smart kind of practiced the law of attraction at Media Days, in the sense of, like, whatever you put out is going to be reflected back to you. And he strolled into Nashville like he didn't have anything to hide. And that's because he didn't have anything to hide. Georgia doesn't have anything to hide, especially now knowing what we know about the AJC's reporting and the problems with that. Like, Georgia came in like they haven't been, getting hammered on national podcasts for the last 6 months. Like, they rolled in like all is well. And, Kirby didn't, I don't think he skirted responsibility. He was asked about the driving situations, and I think, like, he has taken responsibility for that plenty of times now, so I don't think that's a question that really needs to be asked. But I think with Georgia, it was really fascinating how Kirby just owned that room. All the coaches come up on the main stage, and there's a couple hundred reporters sitting in attendance, and there's not a sports information director that's kind of like picking and choosing who's going to ask questions. Anyone basically can ask a question at SEC Media Days. There's a lot of people that can ask questions, and I think for some coaches that can be kind of nerve-wracking, especially if they've had some recent bad headlines. But Kirby rolled in there and just seemed so relaxed and used the podium to get his message across to his team better than I think any coach that we saw all week. And, I ended up writing an article that I guess some maybe find somewhat controversial, although if you actually read it, it's not. And I talked about how Kirby Smart has basically taken the Nick Saban process message and he's found a way to keep it fresh. He has found a way to talk about doing the little things, focusing on, this practice period right now, today, in March or April or in late July and August in fall camp, and not worrying about trying to go 15-0 again and three-peating. And the way that, Georgia went on to a 6-week study as a team of the New Zealand All Blacks and really looked into organizations with sustained success. And I think what was kind of jarring for me is that Nick Saban is undoubtedly the most accomplished college football coach of all time. He's done this for a very, very long time. When he came to the podium on Wednesday, his message felt a little bit scattered. It did. And, it was interesting hearing him talk about going to Italy on vacation because it looked like he enjoyed himself and had a nice time, and that almost bothered him on some level. Like, maybe there was a slight realization of like, oh, I could be off doing this with my wife and, really, really living this nice, enjoyable life and chilling out, having a good time. Right. So I thought that was kind of fascinating to watch. And when Alabama came to town, it was like Saban basically said, one of his quotes was, "We want to stay focused on the process of what we need to do to play winning football at every position. And I'm not here to create expectations for our team. Lots of people will do that, but expectations in some way are a premeditated way to create disappointment. I think you can look at it in your life, and that's why I say we need to stay process-oriented, not focused on the outcome, but focused on the things that we need to do to get the outcome that we want." Him and Kirby Smart are trying to deliver the same message. Like the tenets of what they're saying are underlying it all. It's the same thing they're trying to get out of their team. But Kirby Smart seemed to find a much more interesting way to deliver that message, talking about better never rest and the New Zealand All Blacks. And then, when we had a chance to interview Cedric Van Pran, he's talking about how, one of the things that the All Blacks do is they have one of their mottos is sweep the floors, and how Georgia's offensive line, they clean their own meeting rooms and locker rooms, literally sweeping the floors. And I saw people try to ask Georgia players about certain opponents or, different things that are coming up in 2023. And they just were really, really good at deferring to, we treat everything the same. And, we're worried about the here and now, and we're going to do what we need to do in this moment to maybe try to get to that moment later, but just not setting any sort of, trap for themselves or putting any of that kind of reverse rat poison out there where another team is going to look at it and find a way to get motivated. And what that reminded me a lot of, it was like, Alabama circa mid 2010s. Right. And then Alabama comes to town and Nick Saban gets on the podium and he says what he always says about being a process-oriented group, but you look at what's going on at Alabama over the last, 12 months, right? Like Will Anderson admits that their defense was in a place of anxiety prior to the Tennessee game. Like that is so far on the opposite end of spectrum of being focused on, process oriented and not worried about outcomes that it was jarring to hear from an Alabama football player. You see J.C. Latham come to Nashville and, he gets asked about like, what would it be like for you guys if you're not selected to be the preseason favorite in the SEC West by the media, and talked about how they felt they were disrespected, and talked about how they are like pissed off, and it's like, well, just because you didn't win a national championship doesn't mean that you were disrespected. But he said, like, understanding this group, I know we're going to win it all. National championship, undefeated, Joe Moore Award. I want that also. And I think that it's just very, very different than what we're used to. Another one of Latham's quotes was, I know we are going to go out there, compete, dominate, and do what we have to do to win. And I know we're going to win it all and go undefeated. Whatever anybody outside of your family says essentially isn't what matters. Maybe they are. Maybe they are going to do that. But getting up there and saying that at SEC Media Days, for me, it kind of felt like the media days equivalent of the 2015 Georgia-Alabama game in the rain, where Georgia's players got all up in Alabama's tunnel when they were coming out on the field. And, they were barking and creating a bunch of fake juice, and then they went and got their butts kicked. It feels like the same kind of vibe of, this team is going to say a lot of big things, but at the end of the day, it doesn't feel like Saban has them in the headspace that he used to be able to keep them in. And times have changed. He's been there for 16 years. He is undoubtedly the greatest coach in college football history, but it feels like Kirby Smart is doing a better job of delivering the Nick Saban message right now than Nick Saban is. And it feels like Kirby Smart took the Nick Saban blueprint and he's kind of fixed the couple flaws in the system. Saban's out here trying to replace two coordinators after one of the worst seasons that he's had at Alabama. And Kirby Smart gets on the podium and talks about every coach on our staff this year, every full-time coach was part of our staff last year, and how they have 26 Georgia grads on their staff, and talking about the retention in their staff, and talking about 17 of 20 COVID players from that COVID recruiting class have stayed at Georgia. And Georgia is doing not just a good job of recruiting like athletic freaks right now, but they're doing a good job of recruiting guys that are Georgia guys that are going to come in and work, and they're going to buy in, and they're going to listen to this process oriented ethos that Kirby Smart is trying to preach. And it feels like Alabama's in a spot now where they've gotten a little bit behind the eight ball, and so they're trying to take some shortcuts to catch up. And they're trying to, they're like, the more the time goes on, it feels less like Jermaine Burton, chose to leave Georgia for a better situation, and more like Jermaine Burton didn't fit in at Georgia, right? It feels more and more like some of these guys that Alabama has brought in, it's like they're very talented, but they're not the same dudes that Alabama had 5, 7, 10 years ago that are just killers. And maybe that changes this year, right? Like, I want to be clear that Alabama has enough talent on its roster that at any time they can catch lightning in a bottle and they can go win a national title. But right now, when you just talk about, this is talking season, right? So I'm going to talk, but when you talk about SEC Media Days and you talk about what you want to see from a program and the mentality of the players, and does it seem like these guys are bought in? We're only looking at 3 players from each team, right? Like these teams that come in, like they should be kind of basically bringing like the guys that are going to be the best example of program culture. And Alabama brought a guy that got up and guaranteed a national championship. And Georgia doesn't play Alabama this year in the regular season, right? They might not play him at all, but it just feels like a very un-Alabama move to give that bulletin board material to every team you're going to play. So, yeah, it kind of surprised me to see that. What's up, Harry? Glad you jumped in here. See a lot of you guys active in the chat. Sacred Grove, Dogfather, Mike, Rhett. Thank you guys for being here. If you guys have any questions about SEC Media Days in particular, throw them in the chat and I will try to get to them. Now that I've kind of, talked about the Georgia Alabama side of things, I do want to say the one last thing I'll say about SEC Media Days that was kind of fascinating to me was we heard Cedric Van Pran talk about the sweeping on the floors mantra of the New Zealand All Blacks and Georgia adopting that in their pursuit of continued excellence and perfection. And then I was kind of sitting around at one point in a corner of one of the meeting rooms up there in Nashville at the Hyatt, and the SEC people were shuttling players back and forth to their next media engagements. And a Georgia player was walking by and stopped, in the middle of kind of this. It wasn't like he wasn't in the middle of a bunch of people, but he was just kind of in the middle of passing through. And he stopped all of a sudden, and the SEC media people looked kind of like surprised, like, why is this guy stopping? And he bent down and picked up a piece of trash off the floor. And it was, it was kind of interesting to see a Georgia player literally sweeping the floors after we had, had just kind of heard Van Pran talking about it. To me, it was like a good real life example of this message is landing. So, we'll see, right? Like, it doesn't mean Georgia's, it doesn't mean anything really, but it is maybe somewhat informative of just kind of where the headspace is, right? Will asked what coach impressed me the most. I would say probably Kirby, honestly, like just the way that he was able to command the room and, kind of handle maybe the pressure of that moment, but really the way he uses the podium to get the message he wants to get across to his players. Aside from that, from an impressive standpoint, it depends on what criteria you're kind of talking about. I did kind of like, Sam Pittman's fun. He's enjoyable. I don't know if impressive is maybe like the best adjective for it, but I thought that he does a good job of keeping people engaged. And, I think he does a good job of representing that school and that program well. Sacred Grove asks, do you think Carson Beck will have a Mac Jones, Kyle Trask kind of year, first year starting, but will look like a vet type season? I don't know that I don't think he'll have the raw numbers of those two, but the more and more that I am hearing from sources and people around the Georgia program about what Carson Beck has been up to this offseason, I think the more and more I am buying stock in Carson Beck having a very good 2023. I think the questions on Carson Beck were never arm talent or, physical talent. I think it was always about like him being a consistent leader who shows up every single day in the same way, and him being vocal. And, I think ever since the end of the 2022 season, he has stepped up his work habits in a very real way. And from what I am hearing, that this offseason 7-on-7 type work, like Beck has gotten into a very good, confident groove with Georgia's top flight of receivers. He is, telling those guys how he wants them to run certain routes, and, where they need to be and where they need to be looking for the ball. And I think maybe most importantly, he's been organizing a lot of those kind of throwing sessions and off-season activity workout type things. So those are the things you want to hear about the guy coming into the season. I am very curious what Georgia's offensive philosophy is going to look like this year. I think that there is, you lost Darnell Washington. I asked Kirby Smart about this at SEC Media Days. I asked, is the 12, 13 personnel stuff, is that philosophically part of who Georgia is now? Or, is Georgia a program that is about something like what is it? Is this part of your DNA? And his answer was pretty simple, that we're going to try and get the 11 best players on the field, even if that's 7 wide receivers. So I think we will see, a little bit of, I don't know what we'll see, honestly. I think that Lawson Lucky is that dude. So I think there's a good chance that we still see a lot of those 12 personnel sets. But I also have talked to people who feel better about Georgia's group of outside receivers than they have at maybe any point in time in Kirby Smart's tenure in Athens. So I think there is a chance that we see a good number of, kind of plays where maybe you just have Bowers on the field and there's more wide receivers. I don't think Georgia's trying to get too spread out, because physicality is part of their plan. It's part of their DNA. It's part of who they want to be. But I do think there is a chance that Carson Beck has a very big season, is very accurate, but that he's almost too good to put up huge numbers, because Georgia's just going to blow out a lot of teams on their schedule, and he's not going to play very many fourth quarters, or even some, there might be some games where he doesn't play at all in the last 20 minutes. So we'll see. Does Dylan Bell play any of this? Yeah, Dylan Bell is going to play a lot this year. Dylan Bell is going to push for starter level snaps at the X receiver spot. I agree with this take from Harry. I think Kirby uses the games versus lesser foes to experiment and see just what this team is best at executing. Yeah, he absolutely does. There's been a lot of games over the last 2 years where Georgia is not necessarily always trying to call the very best play they can call in that moment. Part of that is, you want to save some of your red zone plays and things like that for better teams further down the road in the season. But there's also games where I think Georgia comes in and says specifically, we want to work on, physically running the ball today, even if there are 8 men in the box. So I think you see that a lot. Yeah. All right. So we're going to get to this. Green Soldier says coffee has Tennessee fans in a frenzy, and it's hilarious. That is correct. If you follow me on Twitter, you've probably seen, I've been in the trenches with the Tennessee fans, and all of this started because I made a comment on Tennessee's recruiting that I stand by, which was that, I think Tennessee's up to the number 7 or 8 class in the 2024 cycle at this point. And I made a comment that I'll start really, paying attention to Tennessee's recruiting or kind of giving them kudos for that recruiting when I see them start to sign some elite line of scrimmage prospects. Very good skill players are a dime a dozen in this world. And I think that, Tennessee, the issues with Tennessee have nothing to do with getting wide receivers open. Mike Matthews, very good player, 5-star player. Not arguing with his eval, but Mike Matthews looks like a lot of dudes that Tennessee either, has already had on their roster over the past season or two with Heupel, or already has on their roster right now. He's big, he's long, and he runs fast in straight lines. Okay. You look at Tennessee's 2024 recruiting class, they've got 18 commits. If I get down to the 7th or 8th highest ranked player in the class, I see the first offensive lineman, Max Anderson, offensive tackle, number 218 national prospect, 12th ranked offensive tackle, 40th ranked player in the state of Texas. Pretty nice player. Yeah, I think that's pretty good. And then they've got an inside offensive lineman named William Satterwhite, who is not ranked nationally at all. They got some linebackers. Spillman kid, who I think they were very excited about pulling from Ohio State. He is a 4-star recruit, not nationally ranked, 28th linebacker in the cycle. And then I get all the way down here to a 3-star named Kellen Lindstrom from Springfield, Missouri, before I find the first defensive lineman in the class, or the highest ranked defensive lineman in the class is what I should say. Then they got another guy named Carson Gentle, who is the 103rd ranked defensive lineman in the 2024 cycle from the Macaulay School in Chattanooga. And then they got another offensive tackle named Jesse Perry from Murfreesboro, Tennessee, Middle Tennessee Christian School. 6'5", 278, 126th offensive tackle in the class. So, do I think that this recruiting class does anything to change Tennessee's outlook as a program? No, not as it currently sits. Even if they sign, and they're not going to, but even if they went and signed Ryan Wingo and Jeremiah Smith, and if they signed a trio of 5-star wide receivers, it wouldn't change my opinion of Tennessee football. And that upsets people. And I'll tell you why I feel that way. I feel that way because the issues with Tennessee have nothing to do with getting guys open. Okay. And since I started sharing takes on this, I have had numerous, none of them, I want to be clear that none of them work for Georgia, but I've had numerous player personnel folks from across college football jump into my DMs to tell me that that they at least agree with my take on this. And my take on this is that Tennessee's system that they're running under Heupel has a built-in ceiling to it. Okay. You cannot do what they are doing with the tempo that they are trying to do it at and beat the top of the top. I know they beat Alabama last year. Alabama last year wasn't a very good football team, first of all. Second of all, they took 17 penalties and I think a +3 or +2 turnover margin for Tennessee to do it. And they did it on a last-second field goal. And the same guy on Alabama's defense gave up 5 touchdown passes. Okay? So I think that, that is something that is worth pointing out in this conversation. I'll put it this way. I will be so bold as to say that Tennessee running the Heupel system cannot win a national title. And the reason why is because that system is built to basically bridge talent gaps. Heupel came into a program with 30-something% blue chips. They're still not a blue chip ratio program right now. There's 16 who are that have more than 50% blue chip players on their roster. Tennessee is not one of them. And so Heupel came in there and he put an offense in place that is designed to, kind of not have to go up against elite players and trade blow for blow. The offense, as I see it for Tennessee, is, and this isn't to say that Tennessee hasn't, like they were very good offensively last year. I'm not saying that they were not a productive offense last year. What I am saying is that their offense is predicated on running a bunch of rules. And if day comes where Tennessee starts recruiting 5-star offensive linemen across the front, then running the system that they're running would be an absolute waste of that talent, because what Tennessee is doing really is like they're playing a numbers game. If you put more people in the box, then they're going to try and throw bombs downfield. If you put more people into the back end, then they're going to try and run on that light box. And as you saw with Georgia last year, the best teams with elite studs on the defensive line, they can defend Tennessee's run game with 5 offensive linemen. And if Tennessee gets to a spot where they have, with 5 in the box, 4 defensive linemen and a linebacker, or 3 defensive linemen, 2 linebacker, whatever that looks like. But if Tennessee gets to that spot where they have all those offensive linemen that are elite players, then doing this, in my personal opinion, is a waste of time. Like, if they have those guys, they should vary their run schemes, and they should impose a physical style, and they can force man coverage on the outside and do 100 different things to influence the defense. But if they have a lead offensive line, then they should be able to run on an 8-man box. They shouldn't be worried about, if there's more guys inside the tackle box, then we're going to flip it out here for a screen. Like, Tennessee's offense is, what they run on any given play is just as much dictated by the defense's formations or personnel packages as it is by what they want to do. And it's also somewhat dependent in certain games on trying to catch a player with his head turned, or, getting a signal from the sideline, and then the ball is snapped because of the tempo, and Tennessee is able to, get a freebie easy touchdown. And when you have 30-something% blue chips and you're playing Alabama or LSU or Georgia, like, you need that. But I think there is a misconception by Tennessee fans, I should say, that like they can just continue to ride this wave into being competitive for a national championship. The ceiling of what they're doing right now is 9 or 10 wins a season. I believe we saw the ceiling of it last year. And you saw in that South Carolina game the drawbacks, and you saw it in the Georgia game too, where like that offense with that tempo, it's clearly vulnerable to crowd noise and false starts. But B, if they get in trouble and they start getting on strings of 3 and outs, you see them punt over and over and over again, and there's not enough time for their defense to A, rest, but B, make the adjustments that they need to make. And so they're really hanging their defenders out to dry. Like the Georgia equivalent to that would be the 2020 Florida game, where Florida went on that crazy run, I think in the second quarter, and scored, touchdown after touchdown because Georgia kept going 3 and out, and they weren't able to adjust to what Florida was doing. They got into halftime, adjusted, and then gave up 3 points the rest of the game. So Tennessee's kind of prone to like basically, putting themselves in a situation where other teams are going to go on a run against them. But I think their system is just as dependent on the defense failing as it is the offense succeeding. And elite teams, let's just take Georgia, for example, they go and they break opponents by taking chunks out of them all game long. They do not play a game of deep ball roulette where they're, just going to try and hope that they hit 2 to 3 long balls a half. And I think, that's why if Tennessee does recruit big-time talent on the offensive line or on the defensive line for that matter, then adjusting that system will be the smart thing to do and the right thing to do. When Heupel's system, in my opinion, it doesn't dictate terms. Like, it forces you to not be able to substitute and all that, but it's not going to break you over and over. And so it's a game of variance. It's a dice roll is what it is. And that dice came up their way much more often than not last year. But like, you look at games like the Florida game where they got up big and then they couldn't control the game because they don't have an offense that can do that. They don't have an offense that, if everyone in the building knows it's time to run clock, they're probably not going to be able to run clock against teams with equal or, maybe better talent. So Tennessee fans, I'm sorry, but it's how I feel. I had a friend who is a Tennessee fan kind of getting my mentions, and he was like, well, can't you understand that Tennessee fans are just like very happy to win 10 games a year right now after being in the wilderness for a long time? Yeah, I totally can. I get it. Like, it's way better than what you guys went through for the last 15 years. But I think at some point you guys want to compete for titles. At least on Twitter, you puff your chest out like you are competing for national titles. So if you want to do that, you either need to realize that Heupel is a bridge coach until the guy comes in that actually is going to install like a style of play that can go and win titles and that can develop elite talent, or Heupel evolves. And maybe he will. Like, I don't know that yet. I can't say that he's not going to evolve. But, I've seen all these messages and tweets about like, well, Jalen Hyatt won the Biletnikoff last year. Yeah, he won the Biletnikoff last year, and he still went in the third round because the NFL doesn't think what he did at Tennessee translates to the NFL. Because, in the NFL, they're going to need some guys that can do more than run go routes and slants. And same deal with Hendon Hooker. Major questions from a lot of NFL people on, what's his pre-snap readability? Because his coach is standing on the sideline and screaming at him, telling him what check to make at the line of scrimmage. And then all the decisions that he's making after that are based solely on the rules of the system. It's, where the DB is going to dictate where the slot receiver is going to run his route. Georgia jammed. They played inside leverage on Tennessee's slots, forced them outside. Hooker wasn't able to deal with that. Tennessee wasn't able to deal with that. But like, selling big time recruits on this offense is going to get harder year after year after they see guys come in and put up giant numbers and they're still mid-round draft picks. Even though Jalen Hyatt is huge and lanky and long and ran a freaking 4.4 40, he went in the third round because nobody knows if he can really play receiver in a pro-style offense that requires, a larger route tree and varied skills. So, you guys Tennessee is going to sign some good receivers because receivers like to put up stats. But I'm very interested to see how the thing goes with Nico, because I think he's an incredible talent and could be a transcendent level player. I also am curious if, he goes and has 2 to 3 exceptional seasons and then lands, in a similar spot draft wise to Hooker, because he's not really reading defenses. He's looking at, one half of the field and then hoping if those guys are covered, there's going to be a running lane that comes open in the A gaps that he can take off straight on. So we'll see what happens. All right. Moving on. I got a bunch of questions from you guys. from our Dog Central subscribers, I am obligated to encourage you to subscribe to Dog Central. I'm also obligated to tell you about Home Field Apparel. They are our partners for the 2023 season. Lots of big plans on the horizon with them. We are going to do a big live show in downtown Athens on the weekend of the Missouri game. So get ready for that. Love to see you guys there. And Home Field Apparel, just simply put, they make awesome stuff. I've got a giant box of new Home Field shirts on the way to me, so you'll see me wearing those pretty much every time I'm on the air moving forward. But you can use the code DogsCentral23, and you can get 20% off on your first order from Home Field Apparel. Season's coming. I know everybody likes to get geared up, get ready for fall and football season. So definitely check out the Georgia collection from Home Field Apparel. They just added another 9 shirts to it. There was already a bunch of stuff, cozy sweatshirts, really, really good fitting stuff. So give it a look, please. Rhett Womack says Justin Williams is a dog tomorrow. Rhett, I agree with you. I believe he will be a dog tomorrow. And we have been telling our Dog Central subscribers that for, I think, before anybody in the industry, actually. So you should probably get over there. Check it out if you're not already. All right. Hunter asks, you can't say Tennessee or Ole Miss. Who would you pick to upset UGA during the year? Who would you pick to upset UGA this year during the regular season if UGA had an upset? Well, if I can't pick Tennessee or Ole Miss, you kind of you're cutting down my options here. I am going to go. I don't think it's Kentucky, even though people are excited about Kentucky. There was a lot of Kentucky buzz at SEC Media Days this week because they seem to feel very good about Devin Leary, and they do have some good receivers. I just don't think Kentucky playing the style that Kentucky plays, which is very Georgia-esque, is ever going to be Georgia. Like you're not going to beat Georgia at Georgia's game. So I would say Missouri. Missouri played Georgia better than anybody last year, save for Ohio State, right? And I'm actually high on Missouri. When I filled out my preseason poll for media days, I had Missouri 3rd in the East. Georgia 1, Tennessee 2, Missouri 3. So Kentucky 4, South Carolina 5, Florida 6, Vanderbilt 7. In case any of you were wondering, Harry, you said the thing that I was about to say, which is that Kentucky lost a host of offensive linemen over the offseason. And I think that that's the thing that I look for in a Kentucky football team when I'm looking for a Kentucky peak year. I want to see veterans on that line of scrimmage. I do like that they've brought Liam Cohen back because he did a very good job for them in 2021. Okay. This is an interesting one. Gio asks, too deep at offensive line looks like what? We're losing 4. We, in this scenario, is Georgia to the draft after this year. So just wondering who steps up and who is getting meaningful snaps in the second half of games this year. I think, your starters at offensive line, I think, are pretty obvious in 4 spots. Right tackle Mims, right guard Ratledge, center Van Pran, left guard is going to be Xavier Truss. And honestly, individually, I've heard good things about all of those guys this season. This offseason, just in terms of work habits. It sounds like Amarius Mims is even freakier than he was before with his just kind of where his body is and the work that he's put in the weight room. So I think that you're going to see, I think Georgia's offensive line, their starting 5 is going to be maybe the strength of the entire team. Who comes after that? I think, the left tackle position is going to be a battle between Blasky and Ernest Green. I would give the edge to Ernest Green right now. So I think, Blasky would be your, if we're going too deep now, we'll say Blasky left tackle, Blasky or Green, but I'll just guess Blasky. I think at left guard, they really, really like Micah Morris a lot. I think he's a guy that 95 to 98% of college programs would be starting right now. And then at center, I think that's actually a spot that Blasky has worked some as well. Maybe Blasky, maybe Jared Wilson. I don't know. Center's tough. And then past that at right guard, Georgia still, they like Dylan Fairchild a lot. I've been told for like 2 off seasons now that pound for pound, he's one of the strongest players on the team. We haven't seen a ton of them, so I don't have a strong opinion either way. But Cedric Van Pran told us at media days that Alu Ba has turned himself into a very good player this offseason, which I thought was very interesting because he did not do the thing where he lists off like every one of his teammates and says that they're great or, whatever. I mean, I think he loves his teammates and respects them, but like he specifically singled out Ba. So that's what I'm watching. And it made me curious if maybe Alu Ba has been working some at center as well. After that group, I think Georgia, the spot that they really have to stay healthy on the offensive line this year is the tackles. I think Blasky, Green, Mims is 3 guys that they obviously would feel comfortable playing. But after that, I'm not sure if they would feel super great about throwing the rest out there. And I would say, Monroe Freeling, true freshman, former 5-star, might be the guy that would be next in line there. Opalite Dog says, I don't know who else you interviewed, but did anyone from another program particularly impress you? This is talking about SEC Media Days. You know what? There was a couple guys that really did actually like stand out. I think maybe the one that stood out to me the most was Anaya Smith from Texas A&M, wide receiver. Just really honest and charismatic. Talked very openly about what's gone wrong for them, and was asked basically kind of, you guys have all this talent, why hasn't it come together? And the answer that he gave was, COVID happened, and then like this new NIL thing happened, and then all these kids were coming into the program, and them and their families, all they were worried about was getting NIL money. And we had kids that weren't going to class. We had, just basically like widespread culture issues that took them time to work through and deal with. And so I was pretty shocked at him saying that, and just kind of saying like, we had all these guys come in that really didn't cut it and didn't do the things that they were supposed to do, and didn't take directions, and weren't coachable. And we feel like we've weeded those guys out. I don't know if they have or not, but if he's right, I think that bodes very well for Texas A&M in 2023. And I did put them second on my preseason ballot in the SEC West. So yeah, I think Bobby Petrino is, whatever you think of the dude, and you probably don't think highly of him as a person, but the guy can call ball plays. He can. And so I think A&M is going to have something this year, because the talent they have up front is second to only Georgia in the SEC right now. And they don't have to play Georgia. So they got a shot to go on a run that's going to surprise some people, in my opinion. Moving on. I've recently heard Tate Ratledge on his podcast and Cedric Van Pran at Media Days hype up Chaz Chambliss and specifically how hard he is to block. Is he poised for a breakout year? This is from our friend June Recruiting Fearmonger, still the best username on the Dog Central forum. If one of you, I challenge any or all of you to come up with a better one. I think Chambliss has always been a very good pass rusher. That goes back to like 2 years ago on the 2021 G Day. He really stood out to me for some of his rushes. Thought he looked very, very good. I also still have questions about his run defense ability. I think it's also fair to say he was not healthy at times last year, and I'm sure that affected his play. But I think he's a bigger leader than people realize. I think he's probably a better player than a lot of people realize. He had a couple games last year where he sort of, in run defense, he did what I would call taking up bad space. Instead of setting edges, he's collapsing too soon, biting on zone reads too early. And then there were times where he played things very, very well. So like any player, the more he plays, there's going to be an acceleration to the growth curve. So I think he could be poised for a big season. I can tell you he is one of – actually, I'll say this like not one of I think he is the biggest leader that Georgia has in their outside linebacker / edge room. And those young guys really, really rely on him to help them understand the scheme and the work habits. And with the talent that Georgia has in that room, just signing, 2 5-stars and a very highly ranked 4-star in terms of edge prospects 3 5-stars in the last 2 years at edge, right? With Marvin Jones Jr., Damon Wilson, and Samuel Mpemba. And I think Jones and Wilson are probably going to see significant snaps this year. So I think he's a very important player to the program. And I think he's a guy that they trust to be out there and, might be your starter in that spot on opening day. What are the question marks that you see position group wise going into the season? Some say quarterback, some say running back. What does Graham see? Great question. Look, it's all relative with Georgia, right? Like the preseason All SEC team came out and they had over half of the first team defenders, and the SIDs have to put the school, like they have to basically nominate players on their team for you to be able to vote on them in all SEC voting. So like Ra Thomas and Dominic Lovett were not on the all SEC preseason ballots. Maybe because they transferred, whatever. But like point being, there's talented players at every position. The big question, and this really is going to tie into the next question that I'm putting up here, which is about losing Jalen Carter. That's the question. Like that's the question that people who cover nationally, cover college football, for other outlets or, cover other teams. Like that's the question that they want to talk about last week was, how do you feel about Georgia's defensive line? I think Georgia's defensive line is better than people probably give it credit for. I think that they were strong team last year. Like I expect them to, I think Carter took up so much attention, right? That I get like why you have to ask. And they don't have a Jalen Carter on the roster right now. Nobody does. Okay. But I think like there's a lot better players left in that interior D-line room than people realize. And Nazir Stackhouse should obviously be getting shout outs in that realm. But like Warren Brinson is still a very, very talented player who, has been kind of that traditional 3-tech, more pass rushing defensive tackle. But like, you sort of started to see him put it all together at times last year. And I think he can be a guy that can 2-gap and, get in there and play the run well. The one that I think I'm most high on in terms of like, if this guy hits his ceiling is way up here, probably first round talent, would be Tyron Ingram Dawkins. Like, he was a 5-star for a reason. And I think there were times last year in fall camp and early last season where like they couldn't quite get him where they wanted him to be from a just like a habit standpoint and a consistency standpoint. And it sounds like he's there now. And talent wise, like, he has the speed to speed rush Broderick Jones off the edge and win. We've seen him do that. And he also has the ability to jump gaps on the inside, and he has the size to 2-gap. Like, he has the ability to do a lot of the things that Jalen Carter did for Georgia last year. So I think that's my big question is, we know Stackhouse, proven commodity. Zion Logue, proven commodity. Like, there's a lot of really high floor players in Georgia's interior defensive line. Does somebody come into the picture that is a high ceiling player that makes those like 2 plays a half that really make you go, wow, and, blow up an opponent's drive? So, yeah, I agree. One of the comments here says the backup D line in the national title game looked great. It did. It definitely did. Okay. If you could see, this is kind of a fun question. If any of you guys watching live want to weigh in the chat, please help yourselves. This is 3 questions, so we'll go one at a time here. If you could have any single player from another team, who would it be and why? That's like a. I mean, I'm assuming this is who I would put on Georgia's roster. I'm trying to think. I think if I'm staying honest to the conversation that we just had, then it would be someone in the interior line, right? Like, I think that's maybe where they've got the most questions, but I don't know that there's really anybody else in college football that's like that transcendent defensive line player. Like I said earlier, there's not a Jalen Carter on this team. So, or I'm sorry, there's not a Jalen Carter in college football anywhere. Maybe like a really good receiving running back. I think that's one of the questions that Georgia has this year is like, one of the things that Georgia does that nobody else really does at the same level is the way that they block on the perimeter. And with Kenny McIntosh last year, they were able to take advantage of what they were already doing, because they could just flip the ball out to him anytime an inside linebacker didn't follow him or was a step slow following him, and he could make them pay for, a 12 to 16 yard chunk at any point in time. So I guess, I would pose the question to the chat, maybe who is the best receiving running back right now? Corey Williams says Quinshon Judkins. That's a good one. Yeah, like that. I mean, he's a stud. There's no question about that. Let me see which running backs had the most receiving yards last year. Well, Kenny McIntosh was second in the country with 509 receiving yards amongst all running backs. First was Evan Hull, who I think is gone, the Northwestern kid. Deuce Vaughn. I don't know. As to who I would put on Georgia's roster from another team right now, because I think Georgia's, some of the conversation we were having earlier about, like, is this a Georgia guy, in terms of the intangibles and the work ethic and the play-by-play type stuff. So, sorry, it's a boring answer. Do I think Mekhi Muse and Cass Jones will get used much this year? I think Muse will be used in some special teams situations as a return specialist. And, I could see him getting 4 to 8 slot snaps a game with the first team offense. I think he will probably, be one of those guys that puts up big numbers with the second string when Georgia's up large in some of their games. And I think that with Cass Jones, if Georgia stays healthy at running back, it's hard for me to imagine him playing a ton, especially with Saban Clark withdrawing from the portal and coming back, because he's a dude that can really play, that can make plays against Georgia's first team defense if he gets the right blocking. So I don't know. I mean, I was there on the sidelines down there when Cass Jones had the big touchdown against Vanderbilt last year to cap that game off. I think he's a talented player. I just think if Georgia stays healthy, that with Branson and Andrew Paul, I know Branson's going to be kind of limited most likely to start the season, but with Paul and Milton and Dejan, you got a really good, probably 3-headed monster there. But I wouldn't be shocked, especially if he blocks well. That's how you get on the field at Georgia. Which players have a chance of getting drafted in round 1 for Georgia this year? I mean, Javon Bullard, Nazir Stackhouse. Let's keep going here. Dumas Johnson, Smile Mondon. Perhaps Kamari Lassiter. That's probably it for the. Well, I'll put Ingram Dawkins in that category as well, because I think if he plays up to his potential, then he could really go off. On offense, I would say first round. I think Amarius Mims is probably a guaranteed first rounder, barring something very surprising. And then I would say Van Pran. I don't know. Center positional value isn't very high. It's not as high in the NFL, but I think Mims and Ratledge could both be first-round guys, honestly. I think Van Pran, will probably be the first center taken. I just don't know if there will, like we were saying, if there will be the positional value there. Dominic Lovett has first-round potential for sure. And then Brock Bowers, obviously, is a first-rounder. And this is going to get you guys excited. Carson Beck. He does. He's got the size and the arm strength. If he puts it all on tape this year, he could definitely be a first-round quarterback. All right. Let's take one from the chat real quick. Which wide receiver has the most yards this year? This is from Corey Williams. I'm going to say Dominic Lovett. That dude just separates consistently all the time. If Georgia wants him to be, I think he can be 1,000-yard receiver. I do. If they're willing to play him into the second half of some games. So, yep. All right. We got 2 more left from the subscribers. If you could pick a team to be a beat writer for based solely on the personality of the head coach, who would it be and why? This is a fun question. I mean, I said earlier I really enjoyed Sam Pittman at media days. He's funny, jokes about, he just doesn't take himself too seriously. A lot of coaches, uh, not only do they take themselves too seriously, but they're also like, there's this extreme paranoia of the media. And, A, how am I going to be portrayed? But B, is my, rival or is my next opponent going to find out something from from the media about my team, right? So that kind of puts a damper on a lot of guys that I think could be like very fun. I mean, you guys know, like I live out west, so like I'm very I'm very big on quality of life and geography and landscapes being part of quality of life. So like there's, I think one program I'm very interested in that this is maybe not going to be that interesting to some of you. I'm sorry, but like I'm very interested in what Kenny Dillingham does at Arizona State. Everyone kind of agrees that's like a sleeping giant, and it's a beautiful area down there. I mean, Phoenix it's a big ass city in the middle of the desert with a bunch of concrete, and it's hot, but like you get 15 minutes outside of it in any direction, and there's a lot of beautiful stuff. My wife and I are actively like trying to live the snowbird style life because she is now a remote employee as well. So, I think it'd be fun to be in Arizona for a lot of the fall. It'd be pretty. I don't want to be down there when it's 120 degrees though. I think it would also be very interesting to cover Colorado for the next couple seasons with Deion Sanders. Everyone has strong opinions about him, which usually leads to people consuming your stuff. So I think that would be fun. And yeah, I mean, maybe if I had to pick an SEC team, I would probably have to go with Lane Kiffin. But it's a fun question. Thank you for that. What you got, Lauren? All right. This is from Sauce House Dog. What kind of sauce are you serving up, man? I want to, if you got some barbecue sauce, hit me up. I'd love to try it out and then pitch it for you. How disruptive do you think our interior D line can be this year? Scale of 1 to 10. Lots of talk about interior D line today. This is good. The philosophy of this show, or of me, I should say, is that like football, for all the changes that have happened in the sport over the recent decades and the air raid spread revolution, game is still won from the inside out. If you can't, I don't care how good your quarterback and receivers are, if your offensive line can't block the guys across from them, then those quarterbacks and receivers are not going to be able to do what they do. So I think like the thing to understand about Georgia is that sacks are very rarely the goal in any given play. And sometimes that, I think that's a mistake. I think that was a mistake in the start of the Ohio State game. Georgia also made that mistake in the 2021 SEC championship game where they kind of set back and they didn't, kind of force the issue, right? They set back in soft coverages. They didn't try to play press on the outside, and they got picked apart rushing 3 and giving guys like Bryce Young and CJ Stroud a lot of time. Or, if they did get off the side, come off the edge on one side, then they weren't keeping contain on the other edge, and Stroud or Bryce Young was rolling out and creating more time and then picking Georgia apart that way. Adjustments, right? You saw Georgia adjust into the national championship game after the SEC championship loss to Alabama in 2021 and basically started that game out, bringing pressure, bringing at least 5 on every third down and forcing the issue and saying, maybe we get beat, like trying to bring too many guys and, Alabama hits us for a slant and our defensive back misses a tackle and this guy goes 70 for a touchdown, but sure as hell aren't going to die a slow death, kind of death by 1,000 paper cuts type deal. So I think you go to the 2022 Ohio State game, and after that first drive of the second half, all of a sudden Georgia started bringing the house, and it worked for them. So I think my point in saying all of that is, like, it's very rare where it feels like Georgia's interior D line is trying to create sacks. A lot of times the value in Georgia's D linemen is their ability to play 2 gaps at once. Stackhouse and Carter against Tennessee last year, being able to control the A gaps and the B gaps, being able to basically go off either shoulder of the guard in front of them, like that is really what Georgia's looking for. And that is disruptive. That is disruptive because it allows Georgia to play, they don't have to bring 6 and 7 guys up near to the football to stop the run. So I think in that regard, I think we know Stackhouse, proven commodity. I think Georgia's going to find guys that are going to do a good job of controlling the run and controlling gaps. From a pass rush standpoint, I think that Brinson and Ingram Dawkins have a chance to be special. Like, we've seen those guys jump snaps, jump gaps, get into the backfield, create havoc plays. So I will say it's Georgia, and they're probably going to have the best defensive line in the country. And so to give them anything less than like a 8.5 out of 10 would probably feel silly, even though I did give you my caveat as to, why I would kind of hesitate a little bit to call them super, super disruptive. Just trying to see if there's any other questions in the chat here. Tough Stuff asked about Williams Nunari recruiting update. I got something about that going up on the Dog Central forum later on tonight. So check us out this evening into tomorrow morning and give you the latest on what I know about him and some other guys. I also have a pretty in-depth post with just kind of interesting things that I heard from SEC Media Days, the latest on some recruiting, on some other high-priority Georgia targets. Also have in the update that I will do tonight, I got a piece of information that I think will be a pleasant surprise for a lot of you. So give it a read, dogcentral.com when you get a chance. Other than that, I think we are done for today. Really appreciate all of you for joining. We had a lot of you watching live and joining in the chat. It was a lot of fun to do this. We'll be back probably Tuesday or Wednesday. Going to try and make sure this is at least twice a week as we move into fall camp. And we'll also be doing some season preview, win total type stuff here soon. So thank you guys for joining. Dogcentral.com. Also check out homefieldapparel.com. Use code DogCentral23 for 20% off your first order. Even if it's not your first order, Homefield says if you use a different email than the one you did the time before, that nobody's going to be any the wiser. So check that out. You guys have a good rest of your weekend.